Clara Whitfield pressed her cracked palms together and prayed, not for love, not for safety, but for the courage to step off the stagecoach into a town that already hated her. She had sold her mother's piano, packed one trunk, and ridden 1,800 miles across America to marry a man whose face she had never seen. And when that man finally arrived, sunburned, limping, silent, he looked at her like she was the last mistake he could afford to make. This is a story about what happens when two people choose each other before the world gives them permission. If you stay until the end, you'll understand why she never looked back. Subscribe now, follow this story to the last word, and comment the name of your city so I can see just how far this story has traveled. The stagecoach pulled into Red Creek Crossing at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon in July, and the heat hit Clara Whitfield like an open furnace door. She gripped the edge of the window frame. Her fingers were white. Her knuckles ached. She had been holding on like that for the last 40 miles. Not because the road was rough, but because if she let go, her hands would shake, and she refused to let them. Not today. Not in front of strangers. The driver called down from the top of the coach. "Red Creek, ma'am. End of the line." Clara swallowed hard. She smoothed the front of her dress, a pale blue cotton thing she had ironed twice that morning at the last relay station. It was already damp with sweat. She could feel the dust settling on her neck, in her hair, between her teeth. She stood. Her knees protested. 1,800 miles by train and stage from Boston had done something unkind to her body. She was 24 years old and felt 50. The door opened. Sunlight exploded into the cabin. She stepped down onto the dry, cracked earth of West Texas and immediately understood something no letter had ever told her. This land did not want her here. Two men stood near a fence post across the road. Ranch hands, sun-darkened, arms folded. They watched her the way men watch something they already know won't last. One of them spit tobacco into the dust. The other tilted his hat back and squinted. "That her?" the first one muttered. "Reckon so." Clara stood perfectly still. One trunk, one handbag, one letter folded inside her left glove. The letter that had brought her here. The letter from a man named Caleb Mercer. She looked up the road, then down it. No one was coming. She turned to the driver. "Is there a hotel?" The driver was already climbing back up. "Ain't no hotel in Red Creek, ma'am. There's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Davenport runs it." He paused. "But I thought you were expected." "I am," Clara said. She said it firmly, like if she said it with enough certainty, it would become true. The driver shrugged, tipped his hat, and snapped the reins. The stagecoach lurched forward, and just like that, her last connection to the world she knew rolled away in a cloud of yellow dust. Clara stood alone. The 2 ranch hands were still watching. She picked up her trunk by the leather handle. It was heavier than she remembered. She had packed books. Emerson, Thoreau, a volume of poetry her father had given her before he died. Foolish things for a frontier wife. She knew that. She had packed them anyway. She walked. The town was small, smaller than she had imagined. A general store, a bank with a painted sign that read Reed and Associates, a church with a crooked steeple, a blacksmith shop, a saloon with the doors open and piano music drifting out. Bad piano music, the kind that made her wince. People noticed her. A woman on the porch of the general store leaned toward another woman and whispered something behind her hand. The other woman's eyes went wide. Clara kept walking. A man in a vest stepped out of the bank and stopped. He looked at her trunk, looked at her dress, looked at her face. "You lost, miss?" "No, sir. I'm looking for the Mercer Ranch." The man's eyebrows went up. Just slightly. Just enough. Mercer, he repeated. He said the name like it tasted sour. You the one from back east? I am. Thomas Reed. He didn't offer his hand. I manage the bank here. Caleb's got an account with us. He paused. Had an account, I should say. Things have been tight. Clara didn't blink. I'm sure they have. The drought. Reed tilted his head. You know about the drought? I read, Mr. Reed. Something shifted in his expression. Not respect. Not yet. Something closer to surprise, like he hadn't expected her to know anything at all. Well, he said slowly, Caleb's place is 4 miles north. Follow the road past the creek bed. It's dry this time of year, and turn left at the dead oak. Can't miss it. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. If he comes to get you, that is. Clara set her trunk down. Her arms ached. Her palms were raw from gripping the handle. He'll come, she said. Reed looked at her one more moment, then turned back toward the bank. Over his shoulder, he said, I hope for your sake he does, miss. Red Creek ain't kind to women without people. Clara stood on the dirt road and watched him disappear inside. The door closed behind him with a click that sounded final. She waited. The sun crawled across the sky. The heat pressed down on her shoulders like a physical weight. Sweat ran along her spine. Her mouth was dry. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. She sat on her trunk because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. She folded her hands in her lap so no one could see them shaking. A woman approached, older, heavy-set, a face that had been handsome once and was now mostly determined. She wore a dark dress with a high collar despite the heat, and she walked like someone who owned the ground beneath her feet. You're the male bride, the woman said. It wasn't a question. Clara stood. I'm Clara Whitfield. Ruth Davenport. I run the boarding house. Mrs. Davenport looked her over, head to toe, slowly, the way you'd examine a horse you suspected was lame. You're younger than I expected. I'm 24. And you came all the way from Boston to marry Caleb Mercer. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Davenport was quiet for a moment. Then she said, His first wife died, you know. Clara felt something cold settle in her chest. I know. He told me. In his letters. Did he tell you how? Fever. 2 winters ago. Did he tell you he didn't speak to anyone in town for 3 months after? Clara hesitated. No. Mrs. Davenport nodded, like that confirmed something. Caleb Mercer is a decent man. I'll say that plainly. But decent and ready are 2 different things. She looked toward the north road. He sent for you because he's losing that ranch, not because he's healed. The words landed hard. Clara felt them in her stomach. I didn't come here expecting a healed man, Mrs. Davenport. Then what did you come here expecting? Clara thought about that. She thought about the small room she had rented in Boston after the school closed, the weeks of silence, the letters she had written to 3 different men in 3 different territories, because she had decided, deliberately, carefully, with full knowledge of what it meant, that she would rather build something hard than wait for something easy that would never come. A chance, Clara said quietly. That's all. Mrs. Davenport studied her for a long time. Something shifted in the older woman's face. Not softness exactly, but a crack in the armor. Come inside, she said. I'll get you water. If Caleb doesn't show by dark, he'll sleep at my place. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This town talks, Miss Whitfield. And right now, you're the only thing worth talking about. Clara followed her inside. The boarding house was plain, clean, sparse. A wooden table, 4 chairs. A window that faced the road. Mrs. Davenport poured water from a clay pitcher. Clara drank it so fast she almost choked. Easy, the older woman said. You'll make yourself sick. Clara wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. The gesture was not ladylike. She didn't care. "Where did you teach?" Mrs. Davenport asked. "A grammar school in Roxbury. It closed last spring." "Why?" "The building was condemned. They didn't have money to repair it." "And your family?" "My mother died when I was 12. My father 2 years ago." "No brothers? Sisters?" "No, ma'am." Mrs. Davenport poured her more water. "So you're alone?" "I was alone," Clara corrected. "That's why I'm here." The older woman sat down across from her. She folded her hands on the table. "Let me tell you something about this town, Miss Whitfield. The women here work. They birth children in rooms with dirt floors. They lose cattle. They bury husbands. They don't read Emerson." Clara's hand went to her trunk instinctively. "I saw the books," Mrs. Davenport said. "The driver mentioned it." Of course he did. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the weather. "Reading doesn't make me weak, Mrs. Davenport." "No, but it makes you different. And different is dangerous in a small town." Before Clara could respond, the door opened. A man stood in the frame. Tall, broad-shouldered, sun-darkened skin, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same rock as the landscape. He wore a sweat-stained shirt, dusty boots, and a hat that had seen too many seasons. He was limping, favoring his left leg. His eyes found Clara immediately, and she saw something in them she hadn't expected. Fear. Not the fear of a weak man, the fear of a man who had asked for something he wasn't sure he deserved. "Miss Whitfield?" His voice was low, rough, like gravel dragged over wood. Clara stood. "Mr. Mercer." He held his hat in both hands. His knuckles were scarred. His fingernails were cracked and dirty. He looked at her the way someone looks at a fire, wanting the warmth, afraid of the burn. "I'm late," he said. "You are?" "Fence broke on the north pasture. Lost 2 calves." "I'm sorry to hear that." He stood there. She stood there. The silence between them was enormous. Mrs. Davenport watched from the table with an expression that gave away nothing. Caleb Mercer took a breath. "You shouldn't have come in summer." Clara felt the words hit her like a slap. She straightened her spine. "You shouldn't have written back if you didn't want me here." Something flickered across his face. Surprise. Maybe respect. He put his hat back on. "I've got a wagon outside. Your trunk fit in the back?" "It will." He turned and walked out. No more words. No welcome. No warmth. Clara looked at Mrs. Davenport. The older woman raised an eyebrow. "He's not much for conversation. I noticed. His first wife, Margaret, she could talk enough for both of them. Maybe that's what he's missing." Clara picked up her trunk. It was heavier now. Everything was heavier now. "Or maybe," Clara said, "he's waiting to see if I'm worth talking to." She walked out into the heat. The wagon was old. The horse pulling it looked tired. Caleb was already in the driver's seat. He didn't offer to help her with the trunk. She lifted it herself. Her arms screamed. Her palms burned. She got it into the back of the wagon without asking. Then she climbed up beside him. He glanced at her. Just once. Quick. Then he snapped the reins, and they rolled north. They didn't speak for the first 2 miles. Clara watched the land. It was nothing like Massachusetts. Flat. Dry. The earth was cracked in long, jagged lines like broken pottery. Mesquite trees stood crooked and defiant, their shadows thin as wire. She could feel Caleb beside her. The tension in his shoulders, the way he held the reins too tight. "How many head of cattle do you have?" she asked. He seemed surprised by the question. 47. Had 62 in spring." "The drought?" "Drought and disease both. Lost a dozen to blackleg in May. Did you quarantine the sick ones? He turned his head, looked at her fully for the first time since they'd left town. You know about blackleg? I read about it before I came. I read everything I could find about cattle ranching in West Texas. He was quiet for a long moment. The wagon wheels creaked. The horses' hooves made soft sounds in the dust. Why? He finally asked. Because I don't believe in arriving unprepared. He faced forward again, but something had changed in the line of his jaw. The tension was still there, but it had shifted, like a door that was locked had been tested and found that maybe the lock wasn't as strong as the man behind it thought. They reached the ranch at dusk. Clara saw it before he said anything. A low wooden house, a barn with a sagging roof, fencing that needed repair in a dozen places. A windmill that turned slowly in the hot evening air. It was not what she had imagined. It was harder, smaller, more broken. It was real. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop. He sat there for a moment, looking at his own house like he was seeing it through her eyes and hating what he saw. It ain't much, he said. Clara looked at the house. She looked at the land. She looked at the man sitting beside her, this quiet, damaged, stubborn man who had sent a letter across a continent because he was too proud to quit and too lonely to go on. It's enough, she said. He turned to her. Something moved behind his eyes. Something raw. You don't have to stay, he said. His voice cracked on the last word, just barely. If you wake up tomorrow and this ain't what you wanted, I'll take you back to town myself. I'll pay for your ticket home. You don't owe me nothing. Clara climbed down from the wagon. She stood in the dust of his yard and looked up at him. Mr. Mercer? Ma'am? I didn't sell my mother's piano and ride 1,800 miles to turn around at the gate. She picked up her trunk and walked toward the house. Behind her, Caleb Mercer sat in the wagon and watched her go. He didn't move for a long time. The sun was dropping behind the flat line of the horizon, and the sky was turning the color of something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. He hated how much it hurt. Inside, the house was clean. Painfully clean. Clara could see that someone, Caleb himself probably, had scrubbed every surface. The table was set for 2. There were wildflowers in a jar by the window. Small yellow ones. Prairie flowers. He had tried. That single fact broke something open in her chest that she had been holding shut since Boston. Since her father's funeral. Since the school closed and the landlord raised the rent, and the last letter she received from Caleb Mercer had said simply, I can't promise you comfort, but I can promise you honesty, and I will work every day to deserve whatever you decide to give. She had read that line 40 times on the train. She set her trunk down by the bed. The mattress was thin, the quilt was handmade, rough stitching, faded fabric, but clean. A knock on the doorframe. Caleb stood there. He didn't come in. There's food in the kitchen, beans and cornbread. I ain't much of a cook. That's fine. I'll sleep in the barn. Clara turned. Mr. Mercer, it's proper, he said firmly, until we're married. If we're married. He paused. That's your decision, not mine. She looked at him. This man who wouldn't cross the threshold of his own bedroom because he believed she deserved the right to choose. When is the ceremony? She asked. Whenever you say. How about Saturday? He blinked. Whatever he had expected her to say, it wasn't that. Saturday's 3 days from now. I know. You don't want more time? Clara sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands were in her lap. Her palms were raw from the trunk handle. She was exhausted, overheated, and more frightened than she had been in her entire life. "Mr. Mercer, I have spent the last 2 years running out of time. I lost my father. I lost my school. I lost my home. I did not come here to wait. I came here to begin." Caleb gripped the doorframe. His knuckles went white. "Saturday, then," he said. He turned and walked into the dark. Clara sat alone in the small, clean room of a stranger's house, 4 miles from a town that didn't want her, and she pressed her cracked palms together and prayed. Not for love, not yet. For the strength to stay. Outside, Caleb Mercer lay down in the barn on a blanket that smelled like hay and horse sweat, and he stared at the ceiling, and he said something he hadn't said out loud in 2 years. "Don't let me ruin this." The stars above Red Creek were enormous that night, bright and cold and indifferent. But somewhere between the house and the barn, in the space between 2 people who had chosen each other before they'd even met, something had already begun. Something quiet, something stubborn. Something that this dry, cracked, merciless land would try its very best to kill. Clara woke before dawn and didn't know where she was. The ceiling was wrong, the air was wrong, the smell, dust and dry wood and something faintly sweet like dried grass, was wrong. Then she remembered. Texas. She sat up, her palms throbbed. She looked at them in the gray light, red, raw, blistered from the trunk handle. She closed her fists and opened them again. The pain was sharp and honest, and she held on to it because it reminded her that yesterday had been real. She had arrived. She was here. And in 3 days, she would marry a man who couldn't look at her for more than 2 seconds without turning away. Clara dressed quickly. She chose her plainest dress, brown cotton, long sleeves despite the heat. She pulled her hair back tight. No ribbon, no softness. If this town wanted to see a woman who didn't belong, she would at least look like one who wasn't trying to impress. She opened the bedroom door and stopped. The kitchen table was set. 1 plate, 1 cup. A pot of coffee still warm on the stove. A piece of cornbread wrapped in cloth. Caleb had been inside the house while she slept. He had cooked for her and left without waking her. She touched the coffee pot. Warm. She ate standing up. Through the window, she could see him already working. He was by the fence line, shirtless, swinging a post driver with a rhythm that spoke of years. His back was scarred. She could see that even from this distance. Long, pale lines across brown skin. Not whip marks, work marks. The kind a man earns from barbed wire and broken wood, and years of doing everything alone. Clara finished the cornbread, washed the plate, and walked outside. The heat was already brutal. 7 in the morning, and the air felt solid. She walked toward the fence line. Caleb saw her coming and stopped mid-swing. He wiped his face with his forearm. "Morning," he said. "Morning. Coffee was good." "It was burnt." "I've had worse." He almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth moved a fraction, then stopped, like his face had forgotten how. "What can I do?" Clara asked. He looked at her, then at her hands, then at the blisters. "You're hurt." "I'm fine." "Those need wrapping." "They need work, Mr. Mercer. Same as everything else here." He drove the post into the ground with one clean strike. "The chicken coop needs cleaning. Feed's in the barn, left side. Elias usually does it, but he's been riding the south pasture since yesterday checking on the herd." "I can handle chickens." "They bite." "So do I." That almost smile again. Closer this time. Clara turned toward the barn and walked straight into the worst smell she had ever encountered in her 24 years of life. The chicken coop was a disaster. Feathers and filth and 6 angry hens who looked at her like she had personally offended them. She gagged. She pressed her sleeve to her nose. She picked up the shovel. 2 hours later, she emerged covered in things she refused to name. Her dress was ruined. Her hair had come loose and was plastered to her neck. Her blistered hands were bleeding through the rags she'd wrapped around them. She walked to the water pump and worked the handle until cold water poured over her head and hands and she could breathe again. "Well now." Clara spun around. A man was leaning against the fence. Lean, weathered, maybe 50. He had the easy posture of someone who'd spent more time on horseback than on foot. His hat was pushed back, and he was grinning. "You must be the Boston lady," he said. "Clara Whitfield." "Elias Boone. I work for Caleb." He looked at the chicken coop, then back at her. "You clean that whole thing yourself?" "Someone had to." "Ma'am, I've been putting that off for 3 weeks." "I can tell." Elias laughed, a real laugh, rough and warm. "Caleb said you were direct. He didn't say you were funny." "Caleb said something about me?" Elias caught himself. The grin stayed, but he shifted his weight. "He might have mentioned a thing or two. Over the past few weeks, while he was scrubbing the house top to bottom and fixing every loose board and washing his one good shirt 4 times. Clara felt something turn over in her chest. She kept her face still. "How's the herd?" she asked. "Thin. We lost another calf last night. Drought's killing the grass. The creek's been dry for 6 weeks." He paused. "Caleb won't say it, but we're in trouble. If we don't get rain or find new grazing land before August, we'll have to sell half the herd at loss prices. And if we sell at loss prices, the bank takes the land." Elias looked at her sharply. "Who told you that?" "No one, but I met Thomas Reed yesterday, and he didn't strike me as a man who extends credit out of kindness." Elias spit into the dust. "Reed's been circling this ranch like a buzzard for 2 years, ever since Margaret died, and Caleb stopped." He caught himself again. Caleb stopped caring about the numbers. "He cared enough to send for me." "Yes, ma'am, he did." Elias tipped his hat. "I'll let you get cleaned up. Welcome to Red Creek, Miss Whitfield. For what it's worth, you lasted longer than I expected." "How long did you expect?" "Honestly, I had you on the morning stage back east." "You'd have lost that bet." "I'm starting to see that." He walked away toward the south pasture, and Clara stood at the water pump with bleeding hands and ruined clothes, and a feeling she couldn't quite name. Something between terror and belonging. She spent the rest of the morning learning the house, not as a guest, as someone who intended to live in it. She found the pantry half empty. The flour bin had weevils. The sugar was low. The root cellar had potatoes that had gone soft and onions that were sprouting. She made a list on the back of an envelope she found on the table. She wrote in her neat school-teacher handwriting, and she wrote fast. When Caleb came in for the midday meal, he found the kitchen scrubbed, the table wiped, and a plate of fried potatoes and eggs waiting. He stood in the doorway and stared at it. "Sit down," Clara said. He sat. He ate. He didn't speak for 5 minutes. Then he put his fork down. "You didn't have to do all this." "I know. You're not... This isn't a test, Miss Whitfield. You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not proving anything. I'm eating lunch. And I'd like you to eat yours before it gets cold." He picked up his fork again. He ate everything on the plate. When he was done, he looked at the list she had written. "What's this?" "What we need from town. I can go tomorrow if you'll let me take the wagon." "You want to go to town? Alone?" "I went to town alone in Boston every day for 6 years, Mr. Mercer." "Boston didn't have Thomas Reed." Boston had worse. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't look away after 2 seconds. He held her gaze, and something passed between them that neither of them was ready to name. "I'll take you," he said. "I can go alone." "I know you can, but you're not going to." It wasn't control. She could hear that in his voice. It was something else. A man who had already lost one woman and was terrified, bone deep, of losing another, even one he barely knew. "Fine," Clara said. "Tomorrow morning." He nodded. He stood. He carried his plate to the basin and washed it himself. Then he paused at the door. "Miss Whitfield." "Yes?" "The potatoes were good." He left. Clara pressed her hands flat on the table and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her heart was beating too fast. Not from fear, from something worse. From wanting this to work. They rode into town the next morning. Clara wore her second-best dress. Her hands were wrapped in clean bandages torn from an old sheet. She sat straight on the wagon bench and kept her eyes forward. Red Creek was awake early. The blacksmith was working. The saloon was closed. Too early even for the drinkers. Women moved along the wooden sidewalks with baskets, and every single one of them stopped to watch Clara ride past. Caleb pulled the wagon up to the general store. He climbed down and offered his hand. Clara took it. His hand was rough, calloused, enormous around hers. He held it for exactly 1 second longer than necessary, then let go and stepped back like he'd touched something hot. Inside the store, the owner, a thin man with spectacles and a long apron, looked up from his ledger. "Caleb." "Frank, this is Miss Whitfield." Frank looked at her over his spectacles. "The mail-order bride." "The mail-order bride," Caleb confirmed. His voice was flat, daring the man to say something more. Frank didn't. He just nodded. "What do you need?" Clara stepped forward and placed her list on the counter. 20 pounds of flour, no weevils. 10 pounds of sugar. Salt. Coffee beans, not grounds. Lard. A tin of baking powder. And if you have any dried apples, I'll take whatever you've got. Frank looked at the list, then at her, then at Caleb. "She writes a thorough list." "She's a thorough woman," Caleb said. Clara turned her head just enough to see his profile. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Frank. But the line of his jaw had softened just enough that she noticed. They were loading the wagon when a voice cut across the street. "Caleb Mercer!" Thomas Reed stood on the bank porch. White shirt, clean vest, hands in his pockets. He walked toward them with the slow, deliberate stride of a man who wanted everyone on the street to see him approach. "Mr. Reed," Caleb said, "I see you've got your Boston lady." Reed looked at Clara. "Settling in, miss?" "Yes, thank you." "That's good. That's real good." Reed turned to Caleb. "I was going to ride out to see you this week, but since you're here, we should talk about your note." "Not now, Reed. It's past due, Caleb." Clara watched Caleb's hands tighten on the side of the wagon. His knuckles went white. "I said not now." 60 days past due." Reed's voice was calm, almost friendly. The kind of calm that hides a knife. "I've been patient. Gave you extensions. Twice. But the bank's got obligations too, and frankly, after this drought—" "I'll have the money." "When?" "After the fall sale." "That's 3 months away, and from what I hear, your herd's looking thin." Reed paused, smiled. "Real thin." Clara stepped forward. She didn't plan it. Her body moved before her mind decided. "Mr. Reed?" Both men looked at her. How much does he owe? Reed blinked. Excuse me? The note. How much? That's between me and Caleb, miss. If I'm going to be his wife on Saturday, it's between you and me, too. The street went quiet. Clara could feel eyes on her from every direction. The woman at the general store window, the blacksmith who had stopped hammering, 2 old men on a bench outside the saloon. Reed looked at Caleb. Saturday? That's quick. Caleb said nothing. His jaw was set so tight, Clara could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. $240, Reed said slowly, plus interest. Clara didn't flinch. She had $47 sewn into the lining of her trunk. Everything she had in the world. Not even close to enough. I'd like to see the terms, she said. The terms? The original loan agreement, the interest rate, the repayment schedule, all of it. Reed stared at her. Then he laughed. Short, sharp. You want to review the paperwork? I want to understand what we owe. Is that unreasonable? It's unusual. I'm an unusual woman, Mr. Reed. I thought the town had made that clear. Someone on the street made a sound. It might have been a laugh. Reed's smile disappeared. Come by the bank tomorrow, he said. His voice had lost its friendly edge. I'll have the documents ready. He turned and walked away. Clara stood still. Her heart was hammering. Her bandaged hands were trembling at her sides. Caleb was staring at her. You didn't have to do that, he said, quiet, almost a whisper. Yes, I did. Why? She looked at him. Because he was trying to humiliate you in front of this town, and I won't stand next to a man I'm going to marry and watch someone do that. Caleb's throat moved. He swallowed hard. He looked away, then down at his boots, then back at her. Clara. It was the first time he had used her name. Yes? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Whatever he was trying to say, it wouldn't come. Finally, he just said, We should go. They rode back in silence, but it was a different silence than before. The first silence had been empty, 2 strangers with nothing to say. This silence was full, heavy with things neither of them knew how to speak yet. When they reached the ranch, Caleb stopped the wagon, but didn't move. He sat with the reins in his hands, staring at the road ahead. My wife, Margaret, he said. His voice was careful, like he was handling something breakable. She was kind, gentle. She laughed at everything. Even when things were bad, she laughed. Clara waited. When she got sick, I thought if I worked hard enough, prayed hard enough, it would fix it. I stayed up 3 nights. I rode to town for the doctor twice. I did everything I knew how to do. He paused. She died on a Tuesday morning. I was holding her hand. Clara's eyes burned. She didn't speak. I didn't send for you because I forgot her. His voice cracked. He gripped the reins harder. I sent for you because I was sitting in that house alone one night, and I realized I was dying too, just slower. Clara reached over and placed her bandaged hand on top of his fist. She didn't squeeze. She didn't hold. She just rested it there. He looked down at her hand, at the bandages, at the blood seeping through. You're ruining your wrappings, he said. I don't care. He turned his hand over beneath hers. His palm was up, open, calloused and scarred and shaking. She placed her hand in his. They sat like that for a long time. 2 people in a wagon in the middle of nowhere, holding hands like it was the bravest thing either of them had ever done. Elias found them there 20 minutes later. He rode up on his horse, saw them, and immediately turned his horse around without a word. He was grinning the entire way back to the barn. That night, Clara heated water on the stove and re-wrapped her hands properly. She found a jar of salve in the kitchen. Margaret's, probably. She didn't ask. She just used it. She was sitting at the table reading Emerson by candlelight when she heard a sound outside. She went to the window. Caleb was sitting on the porch steps, just sitting, looking out at the dark. She opened the door and sat down beside him. Not close. A foot of space between them. Proper distance. "You read every night?" he asked. "When I can." "What is it?" "Emerson. Self-reliance." He was quiet, then, "Read some, if you want." Clara opened the book. Her hands hurt. The pages were thin and the light was bad. She found a passage and read aloud, her Boston accent softening the words into something almost like music. "Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string." Caleb listened. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just listened with the focus of a man who hadn't heard someone read to him in years. She read 3 pages, then she stopped. "That's enough for tonight," she said. "Yeah." He stood. He looked down at her. The starlight caught the scars on his hands. "Tomorrow I need to ride the east fence. Elias says there's a section down." "I'll come." "It's hard riding." "I'll come." He studied her face. "You ride?" "I learned in Boston. Not well, but enough. I've got a mare, old girl, gentle. She'll take care of you." "Thank you." He nodded. He stepped off the porch. 3 steps into the dark, he stopped. "Clara." "Yes?" "Saturday." "Saturday." "I'll be there." She almost laughed. "You'd better be. You're the groom." He walked into the dark. She heard the barn door creak open and shut. Clara sat on the porch of a house that wasn't hers yet, in a place she hadn't earned yet, beside a life she was building out of nothing but will and whatever stubborn fire had carried her 1,800 miles to sit on these exact steps. She closed the book. She pressed it against her chest. 2 more days. Inside the house, on the kitchen table, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small piece of paper, folded once, tucked under the wildflower jar. She picked it up and opened it. Caleb's handwriting. Rough, uneven. The letters of a man who hadn't written much since school. "I prayed for rain. God sent me something better." Clara read it 3 times. Then she folded it, pressed it against her heart, and cried for the first time since leaving Boston. Not from sadness, from the terrifying, unbearable weight of being wanted by someone who had forgotten how to ask. Saturday came with no wind. Clara noticed it the moment she opened her eyes. Every morning since she had arrived, the air had moved, hot, restless, carrying dust and the smell of dry grass. But this morning, nothing. The stillness pressed against the walls of the house like the land itself was holding its breath. She dressed in white. Not a proper wedding dress. She didn't own one. It was a cotton blouse she had bleached twice at the boarding house in St. Louis during the journey west, and a pale skirt she had hemmed by hand on the train. She had no veil, no flowers. She pinned her hair up with the 2 silver pins her mother had worn on her own wedding day. The only things of value Clara hadn't sold. She looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror by the washstand and didn't recognize the woman staring back. That woman had sunburned cheeks, blistered hands, eyes that were harder than they had been a week ago. That woman was about to marry a stranger. Clara pressed her palms together. The blisters screamed. She welcomed the pain. It made everything real. She walked outside. Caleb was standing by the wagon. He was wearing a clean shirt, the one Elias said he had washed 4 times. His boots were brushed. His hat was in his hands. He had shaved, and without the stubble, he looked younger, more vulnerable, like a man standing at the edge of something he couldn't take back. He saw her and went completely still. "Miss Whitfield," he said. Then he corrected himself quietly. "Clara." "Mr. Mercer." "You look—" He stopped. His throat worked. He looked down at his hat, then back up. "You look like you belong here." It was not a compliment about beauty. It was something deeper, something that made Clara's chest hurt in a way she didn't expect. "Thank you," she said. They rode to town in the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. The church in Red Creek was small. 12 pews, a wooden cross, a preacher named Reverend Hollis, who had a white beard and hands that shook when he held the Bible. 6 people attended. Elias stood as witness. Mrs. Davenport sat in the front pew, her face unreadable. Frank from the general store came, and his wife. 2 ranch hands Clara didn't know sat in the back. That was it. No music, no flowers on the altar, no family. Clara walked down the aisle alone. Her footsteps sounded enormous in the empty church. Caleb stood at the front and watched her come. His hands were at his sides. She could see them trembling from 10 feet away. Reverend Hollis began the ceremony. The words were standard: love, honor, cherish. Clara heard them the way you hear rain on a roof when your mind is somewhere else. Then the Reverend said, "Do you, Caleb James Mercer, take this woman?" "I do." Caleb said it before the question was finished. Fast. Like he was afraid that if he waited, something would stop him. The Reverend blinked. "Well, all right then." He turned to Clara. "Do you, Clara Ann Whitfield?" "I do." Reverend Hollis closed the Bible. "I now pronounce you man and wife." There was a pause, the kind of pause where a kiss is supposed to happen. Caleb looked at Clara. Clara looked at Caleb. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, gently, the way you touch something you're afraid will break. Then he stepped back and put his hat on. Mrs. Davenport made a sound from the front pew. It might have been a sigh. It might have been something else. Outside the church, Elias shook Caleb's hand and then turned to Clara. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Mercer." "Such as it is. Such as it is," Clara repeated, and she smiled, and Elias grinned back. And for one moment, just one, everything felt possible. Then Thomas Reed appeared. He was leaning against the fence across from the church, arms folded. He hadn't been inside. He had been waiting. "Congratulations," he called out. His voice carried across the street. "I hope the honeymoon's short, Caleb. You've got a payment due in 60 days, and last I checked, a wedding don't pay bills." Caleb's body went rigid. Clara felt it, the shift from the man who had just kissed her forehead to the man who carried every failure on his shoulders like stones. "Walk away, Reed," Elias said. "Just being neighborly." Reed pushed off the fence. He looked at Clara. "Mrs. Mercer now, is it? Well, I hope you brought more than books in that trunk." Clara held his gaze. "I brought exactly what this ranch needs, Mr. Reed." "And what's that?" "Someone who knows how to count." Reed's smile faltered. Just for a second. Then he tipped his hat and walked away. But the damage was done. Clara could see it in Caleb's face, the way the brief light from the ceremony had been snuffed out. He climbed into the wagon without a word. They rode home, husband and wife, strangers who had signed a paper. That night, Caleb slept in the barn again. Clara didn't argue. She understood. The ceremony had made them legal. It hadn't made them real. She lay in the dark and listened to the silence, and wondered if she had made the most courageous decision of her life or the most foolish. 3 weeks passed. They fell into a rhythm. Clara woke before dawn. She cooked. She cleaned. She fed the chickens, who still hated her, but had at least stopped drawing blood. She learned to haul water, to scrub clothes on a washboard until her knuckles cracked, to bank a fire, to store flour properly so the weevils couldn't get in. Caleb worked the ranch from first light to last. Fences, cattle, the windmill that kept breaking. He came in for meals, ate quietly, thanked her, and went back out. They spoke in short sentences, practical words. Pass the salt. Storm coming. Gates loose. But Clara noticed things. She noticed that he always made sure the coffee was ready before she woke. She noticed that he had fixed the loose step on the porch without her asking. She noticed that every evening he sat outside and listened while she read Emerson through the open window, never asking her to read louder, never asking her to stop. She noticed that he watched her when he thought she couldn't see. And she noticed that he still slept in the barn. On the 23rd day of their marriage, Clara rode out with Caleb to check the east fence. The mare, an old bay named Penny, was gentle and patient, and Clara had grown steady enough in the saddle to keep up. They rode in silence until they reached the fence line. 3 posts were down, wire tangled in the brush. Caleb dismounted and started working. Clara dismounted and grabbed a pair of pliers from the saddlebag. He looked at her. "You know how to use those?" "Elias showed me." "When?" "Tuesday, while you were at the South Creek." Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. Closer to wonder. They worked side by side for an hour. Clara's hands bled through the bandages. She didn't stop. She twisted wire, held posts steady while Caleb drove them in, and pulled brush clear with her bare fingers when the pliers wouldn't grip. When they finished, Caleb stood back and looked at the fence. Then he looked at her. "You're bleeding again." "I'm always bleeding. I'm starting to think that's just what hands do out here." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a clean rag. He took her hand, gently, so gently it made her chest ache, and wrapped it himself. His fingers were enormous against hers. Careful, precise. "Margaret used to get blisters too," he said softly. "First year. She cried every night." Clara held still. "Did you wrap her hands?" "Every time." He finished the wrapping. He didn't let go of her hand. "I thought I was doing this wrong," he said. "Bringing you here. Making you work like this. I thought—" He stopped. "I thought I was being selfish." "You're not. You had a life in Boston. I had an existence in Boston. There's a difference." He looked at her. The sun was directly overhead, and his eyes were the color of coffee. Dark, warm, and deep enough to drown in. "Clara." "Yes?" "I'm glad you didn't take the morning stage back." She laughed. The sound surprised both of them. "Elias told you about that?" "Elias tells me everything. Man can't keep a secret to save his life." She laughed again, and this time he smiled. A real smile. The first one she had seen. It changed his entire face. It made him look like the man he must have been before grief carved him hollow. "We should head back," he said, but he was still holding her hand. "We should." Neither of them moved. Then Caleb let go, and the moment passed, and they mounted their horses and rode back toward the ranch in a silence that was warmer than any words either of them could have spoken. That night, Clara found a second note under the wildflower jar. "Your hands are stronger than you know." She pressed it against the first one and held them both to her chest. The fire started on a Thursday. Clara smelled it before she saw it, a sharp, bitter tang in the air that cut through the usual dust and heat. She was in the kitchen when it hit her, and she stopped mid-step, her body going rigid with a knowledge she didn't yet have words for. She ran outside. To the southeast, where the Johnson property bordered Caleb's land, the sky was wrong. It wasn't blue. It wasn't even white with heat haze. It was brown, and at the base of the brown there was a line of orange that flickered and moved like something alive. "Caleb!" she screamed. He was already running from the barn. Elias was behind him, pulling on his boots as he ran. "Grass fire," Elias said. "Southeast quarter, winds pushing it north." "That's our land in an hour," Caleb said. His voice was calm, but his hands were already moving, grabbing rope, grabbing tools, pulling the horses from their stalls. "I need to cut a fire break along the creek bed," he said. "If we can clear a 50-foot strip before it reaches us." "Caleb, that's 2 miles of brush." "Then we'd better move." He swung onto his horse. He looked down at Clara. "Stay here. Wet down the house and the barn. Use every bucket we've got." "I'm coming with you." "No." "Caleb." "Clara." His voice was sharp, harder than she'd ever heard it. "If that fire jumps the break, someone needs to be here to save the animals, the chickens, Penny, the house. I need you here." She wanted to argue. Every muscle in her body wanted to climb onto that horse and ride beside him. But she looked at his face and saw something she hadn't seen before. Not the fear of losing the ranch, the fear of losing her. "Go," she said. He rode hard toward the south. Elias followed. The dust from their horses mixed with the smoke already drifting across the land, and within minutes they were gone. Clara ran. She filled every bucket, every pot, every basin in the house. She hauled water from the pump until her arms went numb. She soaked the walls of the house, the porch, the barn door. She moved the chickens to the stone cellar. She led Penny to the water trough and tied her where she could reach the water if the smoke got bad. Then she climbed onto the roof. She could see the fire now, really see it. A wall of flame moving through the dry grass like a living thing, eating everything in its path. The smoke was thick enough to taste, acrid, choking, the flavor of everything burning. She could see 2 small figures in the distance, Caleb and Elias. They were cutting brush, hacking at mesquite and dead grass with axes and shovels, trying to carve a line in the earth that the fire couldn't cross. They were losing. Clara could see it. The fire was moving too fast. The wind had shifted, not much, but enough. The line they were cutting wasn't going to be wide enough. She climbed down from the roof and made a decision. She grabbed every blanket in the house. She soaked them in water. She loaded them onto the back of the wagon. She hitched the old draft horse, not Penny, the big one, the one Caleb used for heavy work, and she drove south. The smoke was so thick she couldn't see the road. She held a wet cloth over her nose and mouth and kept the horse moving by feel, by memory, by the stubborn refusal to sit in a house and wait for a man to save everything alone. She found them at the creek bed. Caleb was on his knees. His shirt was burned through on the left side. His face was black with soot. Elias was still standing, but barely. He was coughing so hard he could barely swing the axe. "Clara!" Caleb's voice was raw, shredded. "What the hell are you doing here?" She jumped down from the wagon. "I brought wet blankets. We can smother the leading edge if we lay them across the break." "Get back to the house!" "There's no time. Look at it." He looked. The fire was less than a quarter-mile away. They could feel the heat on their skin, hot enough to hurt from this distance. Caleb grabbed her shoulders. His grip was so tight she gasped. "If something happens to you..." "Nothing is going to happen to me that doesn't happen to you. Now help me lay these blankets." He stared at her for one long second. Then he let go and grabbed a blanket from the wagon. They worked together, all three of them, laying soaked blankets across the fire break, shoveling dirt, beating back the flames that tried to leap the gap. Clara's hands blistered and bled, and she didn't stop. Her lungs burned from the smoke, and she didn't stop. A spark caught her sleeve, and Elias slapped it out, and she didn't stop. The fire hit the brake. For one terrible moment it paused, like an animal studying the gap, deciding whether to jump. Flames licked at the edge of the cleared earth. Smoke boiled up in a column that blotted out the sun. Then a gust of wind. The fire jumped. A line of flame raced across the break and caught the dry grass on Caleb's side. It moved toward the orchard, 6 peach trees that Margaret had planted, the only green things left on the ranch. Caleb ran toward it. "Caleb, no!" Clara screamed. He grabbed a wet blanket and threw himself at the flames. He beat them down with his bare hands, his arms, his body. The fire seared his forearms. He didn't stop. He beat the ground until the last flame died, and then he kept beating it, slamming the blanket into the scorched earth like he was punishing it for daring to take one more thing from him. Then his legs gave out. He collapsed, face down in the ash. Clara was beside him in seconds. She rolled him over. His eyes were closed. His face was gray under the soot. His forearms were blistered, angry red welts that would scar. "Caleb! Caleb, open your eyes!" Nothing. "Caleb!" His eyes opened, unfocused. He blinked. He coughed, a deep, wet cough that sounded wrong. "The trees," he rasped. Clara looked. 4 of the 6 peach trees were still standing, scorched but alive. 2 had burned down to blackened stumps. "4 made it," she said. "Margaret planted 6. "I know. 4 made it." He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet, not from the smoke. "I can't lose everything again, Clara." She put her hand on his chest. She could feel his heart hammering beneath her palm. Fast, irregular. The heartbeat of a man who was breaking. "You haven't lost everything. You haven't lost me." Elias appeared, leading the horses. "Fire's dying out."
Wind shifted back. "We need to get him to the house."
They loaded Caleb into the wagon. He protested, tried to stand, tried to say he could ride. His legs buckled twice. Clara pushed him down with a firmness that surprised them both. "Sit down and shut up," she said. Elias snorted. Caleb looked at her with an expression that was equal parts pain and something that, in a different moment, might have been admiration. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Clara drove the wagon home. Her hands were burned. Her dress was destroyed. Ash clung to her hair, her skin, her teeth. She could barely see through the smoke and the tears she refused to let fall. But she drove. When they reached the ranch, she saw the house still standing, the barn still standing, Penny whinnying at the trough, the chickens making furious sounds in the cellar. Everything she had protected was still there. She helped Caleb inside. She laid him on the bed, their bed, the one she had been sleeping in alone for 3 weeks. She peeled back his burned shirt. His ribs on the left side were swollen, purple. When she pressed gently, he hissed through his teeth. "Cracked," Elias said from the doorway. "Maybe 2. I've seen it before. He needs a doctor." "Nearest doc's in Pecan Hollow. 30 miles. Then I'll ride to Pecan Hollow." "Clara!" Caleb grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak, but desperate. "Don't leave. You need a doctor. I need you here. Caleb, please." That word, please, spoken by a man who never asked for anything, A man who had slept in his own barn for 3 weeks to give her space. A man who left notes under wildflower jars because he couldn't say out loud what he felt. Clara looked at Elias. "I'll go," Elias said. "I ride faster anyway." He was gone in minutes. The sound of hooves faded into the smoky air, and then it was just the two of them. Clara cleaned Caleb's burns with water and the salve from Margaret's jar. She tore strips from her ruined dress and wrapped his forearms. She bound his ribs with a bedsheet pulled tight. He watched her the entire time. He didn't speak. He just watched. When she finished, she sat on the edge of the bed. Her body was shaking. The adrenaline was leaving her system, and what was left behind was exhaustion so deep it felt like drowning. "Clara." "Yes. Why did you come to the creek bed?" She looked at her own hands, burned, bloody, ruined. "Because you were out there. I told you to stay." "I know. You could have died. So could you." He reached out and took her hand. Both of them flinched, his burns against her burns, pain meeting pain. But neither of them let go. "I've been sleeping in the barn," he said. "I noticed. It wasn't because I didn't want to be here." "I know. It was because I was afraid that if I got used to you being here, and then you left." His voice broke. "I wouldn't survive it. Not again." Clara leaned forward. She pressed her forehead against his, gently because of the ribs, gently because of everything. "I'm not leaving," she whispered. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Because I chose this. I chose you. Not because I had no other options, and not because I was desperate, and not because I didn't know what I was walking into. I read every article about drought and cattle disease and frontier life that I could find. I knew it would be hard. I knew it would hurt. I came anyway." Caleb's hand tightened around hers. "I'm not Margaret," Clara said. "I can't be her. I wouldn't try. But I am here, and I am staying, and if you make me sleep in that bed alone one more night while you freeze in the barn, I swear to God, Caleb Mercer, I will drag you in here myself." He stared at her. His eyes were red from smoke and pain and something else entirely. Then he laughed. It was not a big laugh. It was small and broken, and it clearly hurt his ribs because he winced and pressed his hand to his side. But it was real, and it was the first time Clara had heard him laugh, and the sound of it cracked something open inside her that she had been holding shut for years. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her wrecked hand. "Good." "Clara." "What?" "Thank you. For the blankets. For the fire. For not listening to me." "You're welcome. Don't get used to the not listening part." "I have a feeling I'd better." She stayed beside him until his breathing evened out and he slept. Then she went to the kitchen and sat at the table and put her head in her hands and shook until there was nothing left to shake. Outside, the smoke was clearing. The air smelled like ash and loss and something else, something clean underneath, the way the world smells after it has burned everything that was dead and made room for what comes next. Clara lifted her head. Tonight she would sit with her husband and her children. She would read them a story and tuck them in. She would kiss them goodnight and whisper, "I love you." Tonight she would sit with her husband and listen to him breathe, and that would be enough. She went back inside. She pulled the chair next to the bed. She sat down. Caleb's hand found hers in his sleep. She held it. She held it all night. The doctor from Pecan Hollow arrived at dawn. His name was Harlan Goss, and he was older than God and twice as tired. He rode in on a mule that looked even older than he did, with Elias trailing behind on a horse that was lathered with sweat. Clara met them at the door. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were swollen, her hands rewrapped in fresh strips she'd torn from the last clean sheet in the house. And she was holding a cup of coffee that she had made more out of habit than need. "You the wife?" Dr. Goss asked. "I am." He looked at her hands. "You fight the fire too?" "Yes." "Lord Almighty!" He shook his head and walked inside. Clara stood on the porch and looked at Elias. He was swaying in the saddle. 60 miles round trip in one night. His face was gray with exhaustion. "Thank you," she said. Elias tipped his hat. "Don't thank me yet. Doc's got the bedside manner of a rattlesnake." From inside the house, Caleb's voice rose sharply. "That hurts like hell!" "Hold still, son. I ain't done." Clara flinched. Elias almost smiled. "He'll live," Elias said. "Caleb's too stubborn to die." 20 minutes later, Dr. Goss emerged. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked at Clara with the expression of a man delivering news he'd delivered 100 times before. 2 cracked ribs, burns on both forearms, 2nd degree mostly. He'll scar. He needs to stay off a horse for 3 weeks minimum. No lifting, no fencing, no stupidity. He paused. That last one's the hardest for men like him. 3 weeks, Clara repeated. He can't work for 3 weeks. If he works, those ribs could shift, puncture something. Then you're not looking at 3 weeks, you're looking at a grave. The word landed like a stone in Clara's stomach. "I'll keep him still," she said. Dr. Goss studied her. "You the one from Boston?" "Yes." "Elias told me about the fire. Said you hauled wet blankets to the creek bed in a wagon by yourself." "Someone had to." The old doctor made a sound that was halfway between a grunt and a laugh. "Caleb Mercer's got more luck than sense. Always has." He picked up his bag. "Keep those burns clean. Change the wrappings twice a day. I left laudanum for the pain, but he won't take it." "Why not?" "Because he's Caleb Mercer." Goss climbed onto his mule. "I'll come back in 10 days. If something goes wrong before that, you send for me." He rode south. Clara watched him go, then turned and walked back inside. Caleb was sitting up in bed. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscle was jumping. The laudanum bottle sat untouched on the bedside table. "Lie down," Clara said. "I'm fine." "The doctor said 3 weeks." "The doctor's an old woman." "The doctor said if you work, you could die, so lie down." Caleb looked at her. His eyes were hard. Not with anger, with something worse. Helplessness. A man who had defined himself by work for 32 years, told he couldn't work. "The ranch." "I'll handle it." "Clara, you can't." "I've been handling it for 3 weeks, while you decided whether or not to talk to me. I think I can manage." That stopped him. He opened his mouth, closed it. "That's not fair," he said quietly. "Maybe not, but it's true." He lay back against the pillow. The fight went out of him all at once, like air from a torn bellows. "Elias can run the cattle," he said. "But the fencing on the north side, I'll do it." "You can't drive posts alone." "Then I'll figure it out alone." He closed his eyes. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met." "You married me." "God help me." Clara almost smiled. She picked up the laudanum and set it closer to his hand. "Take it when it gets bad. I won't tell anyone." She walked out before he could argue. The first week was the hardest thing Clara had ever done. Not the work, though the work was brutal. It was the weight of it, the knowledge that everything depended on her now. Every fence post, every bucket of water, every feeding, every decision. The ranch didn't care that she was tired or burned or frightened. The ranch only cared that someone showed up. She showed up. She woke at 4. She fed the animals. She hauled water. She rode Penny along the fence lines and repaired what she could with wire and pliers, and a vocabulary of curse words she had never used in Boston, but discovered came naturally in West Texas. She burned meals. She ruined a shirt trying to iron it with a flat iron she hadn't heated properly. She fell off Penny once, just slid right off the saddle like a sack of flour, and lay in the dirt for a full minute, laughing at herself because the alternative was crying. Elias helped. He was there every morning, steady and quiet, and he never once made her feel like she was failing. When she couldn't drive a fence post, he showed her how to use the wagon jack as leverage. When she burned the biscuits so badly they came out like river rocks, he ate 3 without comment. "How's the boss?" he asked each morning. "Angry." "Good, means he's healing." On the 5th day, Clara rode into town alone. She needed supplies. Salt, bandages, coffee, and she needed to see Thomas Reed. She tied Penny outside the bank and walked in. Reed was behind his desk. He looked up and his eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Mercer, I heard about the fire." "The whole county heard about the fire." "How's Caleb?" "Recovering." "And the ranch?" "Standing." Reed leaned back in his chair. He steepled his fingers. "I also heard he's laid up. Can't work." Clara said nothing. "That's a hard situation, Mrs. Mercer. A ranch that needs working and a rancher who can't work. And with the payment coming due, that's why I'm here." Clara sat down across from him. She hadn't been invited to sit. She sat anyway. "I want to see the loan documents." "We discussed this already." "We discussed it. You didn't show them to me. I'm asking again." Reed studied her. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. He laid it on the desk. Clara opened it. She read every page. Reed watched her, and she could feel his impatience, but she didn't rush. She read the way she used to read student essays, carefully, looking for what was wrong. She found it on page 3. "The interest rate here says 8%, she said. "That's correct." "The original agreement, this page here, with Caleb's signature, says 6. Reed's face went very still. "The rate was adjusted," he said carefully, "after the first extension." "Was Caleb informed of the adjustment?" "He signed the extension." "He signed a document that said extension of terms. It doesn't mention a rate change." Clara looked up. "I taught grammar school, Mr. Reed. I know the difference between what a document says and what a person assumes it says." The silence in the bank was absolute. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mrs. Mercer?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm pointing out that the original agreement specifies 6%, and you've been charging 8%. Which means the balance you've been quoting is wrong." Reed's jaw tightened. "This is between me and your husband." "My husband is lying in bed with cracked ribs because he nearly died saving his ranch. So right now, it's between you and me." She closed the folder. "I want a corrected statement. 6% from the original date. I want it in writing. And I want the 60-day deadline recalculated based on the actual terms." "You can't just—" "I can, and I am." Clara stood. "Unless you'd prefer I take this to the county clerk in Pecan Hollow and let them determine which rate is correct." Reed stared at her. His face had gone from calm to something darker, something cornered. "The corrected amount," he said slowly, "would be $192. Then that's what we owe, not $240. She picked up the folder. "I'll keep this, for our records. That's bank property. It's our loan, our signatures, our records." She tucked it under her arm. "Good day, Mr. Reed." She walked out of the bank and into the sunlight, and her knees almost buckled. She grabbed Penny's saddle and held on until the shaking stopped. $48. She had saved them $48 with one conversation. It wasn't enough. Not nearly. But it was something. She rode to the general store. Frank was behind the counter. "Mrs. Mercer, you look like you've been wrestling a bear." "Close. I've been wrestling a banker." Frank's eyes widened. Then he grinned. "Reed? Who else? What happened?" Clara hesitated. Then she told him. Not everything, just the interest rate discrepancy. Frank listened with his arms folded and his expression darkening. 6% to 8 without disclosure, Frank said. That ain't right. No, it isn't. You know, he did the same thing to the Hendersons 2 years ago. They lost their place. Clara felt cold. What? The Henderson Ranch, east of here. Good people. Reed squeezed them on the payments, raised the rate, and when they couldn't make it work, he foreclosed. Bought the land himself at auction for half what it was worth. Clara gripped the counter. He's not just collecting on a loan. He's trying to take the ranch. Frank looked at her over his spectacles. Now you're seeing it. She bought her supplies in silence. Her mind was racing. $192. The fall cattle sale might cover it, but only if the herd was strong enough, only if the prices held, only if the drought didn't kill more stock before September. Too many ifs. She loaded the wagon and was about to climb up when a voice stopped her. Mrs. Mercer! Ruth Davenport stood on the boardwalk. Same dock dress, same high collar, same face that revealed nothing and saw everything. Mrs. Davenport. I heard you were at the bank. News travels fast. This is Red Creek. News is the only thing that moves faster than gossip. She stepped closer. I also heard what you found in those documents. Clara waited. Reed's been running this town's money for 15 years. Nobody questions him because nobody wants to make an enemy of the man who holds their notes. Mrs. Davenport paused. Until now. I didn't come here to make enemies. No, you came here to marry a broken man and fix a dying ranch. But sometimes those things require enemies. Clara looked at the older woman. Something had shifted between them. The guarded distance from their first meeting was still there, but underneath it, Clara could feel something else. Something like alliance. What do you know about the Henderson situation? Clara asked. I know Sarah Henderson cried for a week when they lost that land. I know her husband drinks now. I know Reed got 200 acres for pennies. Mrs. Davenport's voice was iron. And I know that what happened to them doesn't have to happen to the Mercers. How? Because Sarah Henderson didn't know how to read a contract. You do. Mrs. Davenport reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The names of every rancher in this county who has a loan with Reed's bank. 8 families. I suspect at least 3 of them are paying the wrong rate. Clara took the paper. Her hands were trembling. Why are you giving me this? Because I've watched Thomas Reed take things from good people for too long. And I've done nothing about it because it wasn't my fight. She looked at Clara, steady, fierce. You made it my fight when you walked into that bank alone. Clara unfolded the paper. 8 names. 8 families. I'm not a lawyer, Mrs. Davenport. No, you're a school teacher who can read. In this town, that's close enough. Clara folded the paper and put it in her pocket. Thank you. Don't thank me. Prove me right. She rode home with the supplies and the paper and a feeling in her chest that was bigger than fear, bigger than doubt, something that felt dangerously close to purpose. Caleb was sitting up when she walked in, against doctor's orders. He was at the kitchen table, trying to write something with his bandaged hands. His face was tight with pain. "What are you doing up?" "Writing to the cattle buyer in San Antonio." He cursed under his breath as the pen slipped. "Can't hold the damn thing." Clara set down the supplies. She pulled up a chair beside him. "Tell me what to write." He looked at her. "You don't have to." "Tell me." He dictated. She wrote. His words were plain and direct. A rancher's words. No flourish, no performance. He described the herd, the quality, the breed. He proposed a September delivery. He named a price that made Clara's eyebrows rise. "That's bold," she said. "That's what they're worth, if the drought breaks." "And if it doesn't?" "Then we're selling skinny cattle at half price, and Reed takes the ranch." Clara finished the letter. She sealed it. Then she put down the pen and looked at him. "I went to the bank today." Something shifted in his face. "Clara, Reed's been overcharging you. The original loan was 6%. He raised it to 8% after the first extension without disclosing it. You've been paying too much." Caleb was very still. "How much?" $48 over what you actually owe. The real balance is $192, not $240. He stared at her. Then he put his bandaged hand flat on the table. "Son of a bitch!" "There's more." Clara pulled out Mrs. Davenport's list. "He may have done the same thing to other families. The Hendersons? They lost their ranch to him 2 years ago. Same pattern." Caleb's face darkened. She could see the anger building, not the hot, explosive kind, but the slow, deep kind, the kind that changes a man. "The Hendersons were good people," he said. "Jim Henderson taught me to shoe a horse when I was 14. I want to look at the other family's loans. If Reed's been doing this systematically, that's dangerous, Clara. More dangerous than fighting a wildfire with wet blankets?" He almost smiled. Almost. Different kind of fire. Same principle, you don't let it burn unchecked. He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. "When I sent that letter to Boston," he said, "I thought I was looking for someone to cook and keep house and maybe not hate being here." He shook his head. "I didn't know I was looking for you." Clara squeezed his hand. The burns protested. She didn't care. "I wasn't what you expected," she said. "No. You're what I didn't know I needed." That night, for the first time, Caleb did not sleep in the barn. He lay on his side of the bed, carefully because of the ribs, and Clara lay on hers. A foot of space between them, proper distance. But in the dark, his hand found hers. "Clara." "Yes?" "Saturday." She frowned. "What about Saturday?" "When you said Saturday for the wedding, 3 days after you arrived. I thought you were crazy." "I was practical." "You were brave. I was the one who was scared." She turned her head toward him. She couldn't see his face in the dark, but she could hear his breathing. Careful. Guarded, like a man about to say something he'd been holding for weeks. "I loved Margaret," he said. "I need you to know that." "I know. But I am falling in love with you in a way that I don't have words for. It's not the same. It's not less. It's—" He stopped. "It's like I've been reading the same book for 2 years, the same page over and over, and you walked in and turned it." Clara's throat closed. She couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. She moved across the foot of space and pressed herself against his good side. gently, carefully, and put her head on his shoulder. "Don't ruin this by being poetic," she whispered. "You're a rancher." He laughed. It hurt his ribs, and he laughed anyway. "Yes, ma'am." They lay there in the dark of the small house, on the dry, cracked land that was trying to kill them. And for the first time since Clara Whitfield had stepped off that stagecoach into a town that didn't want her, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt home. Not the building, not the land, the man beside her, the hand holding hers, the heartbeat under her ear. Home. And 2 miles away in the dark, Thomas Reed sat at his desk in the bank, looking at a folder that was no longer there, and understood for the first time that the woman from Boston was not going to be as easy to remove as the Hendersons. He opened his ledger. He began to plan. Clara spent the next 2 weeks doing something she had never done in her life. She went to war. Not with guns, not with fists, with paper. She started with the Dawson family, 3 miles south. She rode out on Penny with Mrs. Davenport's list in her pocket and knocked on their door at 7 in the morning. Martha Dawson answered, a thin woman with tired eyes and flour on her apron. "Mrs. Mercer," Martha said, surprised. "Is everything all right? We heard about the fire." "Everything's fine. I need to see your loan papers from Reed's bank." Martha blinked. "Our loan papers?" "If you'll let me." Martha looked past Clara at the empty yard, then back. "Why?" "Because I think Thomas Reed has been stealing from you." Martha Dawson stared at her for 5 full seconds. Then she opened the door wide. "Come in." The Dawsons' rate had been raised from 6 to 7.5%. No disclosure, no signed amendment, just a quiet adjustment that added $11 a year to their payments. Money the Dawsons didn't have and couldn't explain losing. Martha sat at her kitchen table and pressed her hands over her mouth. "I told Henry we were bad at math," she whispered. "I told him we must be figuring it wrong. He blamed himself. He thought he was failing us." "He wasn't," Clara said. "Reed was." She rode to the Patterson Ranch next. Same story. Then the Coopers. Same story. Then the Williamses, who had already sold 20 acres to Reed at a loss to cover a balance that never should have been that high. 5 families, every single one overcharged. Quiet theft, dressed up in banker's language, and hidden behind a man in a clean vest who smiled like he was doing them a favor. Clara wrote it all down. Every number, every discrepancy, every date. She wrote in the same careful handwriting she had used to grade school children's essays. And the neatness of it made the ugliness underneath even harder to ignore. Caleb watched from the bed. He was healing, slowly, stubbornly, the way he did everything. He couldn't ride yet, but he could sit at the table, and in the evenings, Clara spread her papers out in front of him and walked him through what she'd found. "He's been doing this for years," Caleb said. His voice was low and dangerous. "Years, Clara. At least 5 that I can prove. The Hendersons, he took their land. He took their land using money they never actually owed." Caleb put his fist on the table. Not hard. His burns wouldn't allow it. But the intent was there. "I want to kill him. I want something better than that. I want him to answer for it in front of the whole town." He looked at her. "How?" "The county clerk in Pecan Hollow. Every loan agreement is supposed to be filed with the county. If Reed's file documents show one rate and his bank ledgers show another, that's fraud. Not just bad business. Fraud. You'd need the ledgers." "I know. He won't hand them over. He won't have a choice. If the county clerk opens an inquiry, Reed has to produce his books. That's the law. Caleb leaned back. He stared at her with an expression she was only beginning to recognize. The look of a man realizing that the woman he'd married was not who he thought she was. She was more. You really are something, Clara Mercer. I'm a school teacher who can read, remember? Mrs. Davenport's words. Mrs. Davenport was underselling you. Clara gathered her papers. I'm riding to Pecan Hollow tomorrow. I'm coming. Your ribs are my ribs. I'll ride in the wagon. You drive. She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. She looked at his face, the set of his jaw, the fire in his eyes, and she understood. This wasn't about stubbornness. This was about a man who had let someone else fight his battle for 2 weeks and couldn't stand it for one more day. Fine, she said, but if you fall off the wagon, I'm leaving you on the road. Fair enough. They left before dawn. Elias stayed behind to watch the ranch. The ride to Pecan Hollow took 6 hours, and by the time they arrived, Caleb was gray with pain and gripping the wagon seat so hard his knuckles had gone white. He didn't complain, not once. The county clerk's office was a small building near the courthouse. A man named Harold Finch sat behind a desk piled with papers. He was bald, meticulous, and clearly annoyed at being interrupted. "Help you?" he said without looking up. "My name is Clara Mercer. My husband, Caleb Mercer, holds a loan with Reed and Associates in Red Creek. I have evidence that Mr. Reed has been systematically raising interest rates on ranch loans without proper disclosure or borrower consent." Finch looked up. Then he looked at Caleb. Then back at Clara. "That's a serious accusation, ma'am." "I have documentation for 5 families." Clara placed her papers on his desk. Every loan, every discrepancy, every calculation. In each case, the original agreement specifies one rate, and the bank has been charging a higher rate without a signed amendment. Finch picked up the papers. He read slowly. Clara could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Caleb sat in the chair beside her and held very still. After 15 minutes, Finch put the papers down. "If these numbers are accurate," he said carefully, "this would constitute a pattern of lending fraud under Texas statute." "They're accurate. I'd need to verify them against the filed copies here in the county records. That's why we're here." Finch stood. He disappeared into a back room. Clara heard file drawers opening and closing. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her burned hands. Caleb reached over and took her hand. She held on. Finch returned with a stack of folders. He sat down and began comparing. Page by page, number by number. Clara watched his face. She watched the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way his mouth tightened, the way he began making small marks on the documents with a pencil. After 40 minutes, he looked up. "The filed rates and the rates you've documented from the bank don't match. In any of the 5 cases." Clara exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. "What happens now?" Caleb asked. His voice was rough. "I'll file a formal inquiry. That compels Mr. Reed to produce his bank ledgers for examination. If the ledgers confirm what Mrs. Mercer has found," he paused, "there will be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "Restitution to affected borrowers, fines, possible revocation of his banking license." Finch looked at Clara. "You did thorough work, Mrs. Mercer." "I'm a thorough woman." "So I see." They rode home. The 6 hours felt like 12. Caleb slept for part of it, his head tipped back, his body finally surrendering to the exhaustion and pain he'd been hiding all day. Clara held the reins and watched the road and thought about Thomas Reed sitting in his bank, not yet knowing that the world he had built on other people's losses was about to collapse. She didn't feel triumph. She felt tired. But underneath the tiredness, she felt something solid. Something that had been building since the moment she stepped off that stagecoach into a town that wanted her gone. She felt like she belonged. The inquiry hit Red Creek like a thunderclap. Word spread fast, the way it always did in a town that small. By the end of the first day, every family on Clara's list knew. By the end of the second day, the whole town knew. By the end of the third day, Thomas Reed knew that the whole town knew. And the look on his face when Clara passed him on the street was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. He didn't speak to her. He just watched her ride past with an expression that was not anger, not hatred, but something more dangerous. The look of a man who had underestimated someone completely and was only now realizing the cost. The county examination took 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, Clara's life changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. Martha Dawson brought her a pie, just showed up at the ranch with a peach pie and tears in her eyes and said, "Henry slept through the night for the first time in a year." The Coopers sent their son to help Elias with the cattle, free of charge, no questions asked. Mrs. Davenport began referring to Clara not as the Boston lady or the male bride, but as Mrs. Mercer, spoken with a weight and respect that made Clara's throat tighten every time she heard it. And one morning, Clara walked into the general store, and Frank looked up from his ledger and said, "Morning, Clara," like she had always been there, like she was permanent. That was the moment she understood what home really meant. Not the house, not the land. The sound of your name spoken by people who had decided you were theirs. Caleb healed. Slowly, then all at once, the way he did everything. One morning she woke up and he was gone from bed, already outside, already working. She found him at the fence line, shirtless, swinging the post driver with a rhythm that was slower than before the fire, but steady, strong. She stood at the porch and watched him, and he must have felt her eyes because he stopped and turned and looked at her across the yard. He smiled, not the almost smile, not the careful, guarded hint of one. A real smile, full, open, the smile of a man who had climbed out of something dark and was standing in the light and couldn't quite believe it. Clara smiled back. He tipped his hat. She shook her head. He went back to work. That was their love language. Not poetry, not grand declarations. Work. Presence. The quiet, stubborn act of showing up every single day and choosing each other without fanfare. The cattle buyer from San Antonio wrote back. He liked what Caleb described. He proposed a price, not as high as Caleb had asked, but fair. Good enough. Clara did the math at the kitchen table. The sale would cover Reed's corrected balance with $60 to spare. $60. Enough to buy supplies for winter. Enough to breathe. "We're going to make it," she told Caleb that night. He was lying beside her, on his side now, close, no longer on the far edge of the mattress. His hand was on her waist. His forehead was against her hair. "We already made it," he said. "The money's just catching up." The county clerk's findings came on a Monday. Thomas Reed had overcharged 11 families over a period of 7 years. Total improper interest collected, $1,412. The county ordered full restitution. Reed's banking license was suspended pending a formal hearing. A temporary examiner was appointed to oversee the bank's operations. Reed did not attend the town meeting where the findings were announced. Clara did. She sat in the third row of the church, the same church where she had married Caleb 6 weeks earlier, and listened as Harold Finch read the findings in his flat, meticulous voice. She felt Caleb beside her, his hand on her knee, his grip tight. Around them, the town listened. Martha Dawson was crying quietly. Henry Dawson had his arm around her, and he was sitting up straight for the first time in months. The Coopers held hands. The Williamses stared at the floor, probably thinking about the 20 acres they would never get back. When Finch finished, there was silence. Then Mrs. Davenport stood up. Every head turned. "I want to say something," she said. Her voice filled the church the way only Ruth Davenport's voice could, with the authority of a woman who had buried 2 husbands, raised 4 children, and never once asked permission to speak. When Clara Whitfield arrived in this town, I told her that different was dangerous. She paused. I was wrong. Different was exactly what we needed. And I owe her, we all owe her, more than a debt of gratitude. We owe her the decency of admitting that we judged her before she'd unpacked her trunk. Clara's eyes burned. She stared straight ahead. "She's not from here," Mrs. Davenport continued. "She reads Emerson. She irons her clothes too much. She talks to chickens like they're students." A ripple of laughter moved through the church. But she stood in front of a fire and didn't run. She stood in front of a banker and didn't flinch. And she stood in front of this town and didn't break. Mrs. Davenport looked directly at Clara. "She's one of us now, and God help anyone who says otherwise." She sat down. The church erupted, not in applause, that wasn't how these people expressed themselves, but in something more powerful. Nods, murmurs, hands reaching out to touch Clara's shoulder as she walked down the aisle afterward. Frank shaking her hand. Martha hugging her so tightly Clara's burned palms screamed. Outside, Caleb pulled her to the side of the building, away from the crowd. "You all right?" he asked. Clara's face was wet. She hadn't realized she was crying. "I'm fine." "You're crying." "I said I'm fine." He pulled her against his chest. Carefully, his ribs still ached. He held her there, her face pressed into his shirt, and she shook against him and let out every fear and doubt and lonely night and burned hand and sleepless morning in one long, silent sob. "I've got you," he said into her hair. "I've got you." She gripped his shirt with both hands. "Don't you dare sleep in that barn again." He laughed. It was the best sound in the world. "No, ma'am. Never again." The cattle sale went through in September. Caleb drove the herd to the meeting point with Elias while Clara managed the paperwork. The buyer paid fair, not generous, but fair. Enough to clear the bank debt, buy winter supplies, and set aside a small reserve for the first time in 3 years. Clara handed the payment to the temporary bank examiner herself, in person, in front of the window where Thomas Reed used to sit. "Paid in full," she said. 6%. The examiner stamped the document. Clara folded it, tucked it into the same pocket where she had carried Mrs. Davenport's list, and walked out into the September sun. Caleb was waiting outside, on horseback. He had his hat pulled low, and he was watching her the way he had watched her that very first day in Mrs. Davenport's boarding house. Like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "It's done," she said. "It's done." She climbed up beside him. He offered his hand, and she took it. And she didn't let go until they were a mile outside of town, and the road had emptied, and there was nothing but open land in every direction. "Caleb." "Yeah?" "I want to start a school." He turned his head. "A school?" "For the ranch children, the Dawson kids, the Cooper boy, the Patterson girls. They ride 2 hours to the schoolhouse in Pecan Hollow, or they don't go at all. I can teach them here, in the mornings, before the work starts." Caleb was quiet for a long time. The wagon creaked. The horses walked steadily.
"Where?" he asked. "The barn. We could clear the east side, put in benches, a board for writing."
"The barn smells like horses." "I've smelled worse. Remember the chicken coop?" He laughed. "I'll build you a proper room, attached to the house, before winter." Clara looked at him. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to. My wife's a teacher. She ought to have a classroom." My wife. He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he'd been saying it for 20 years instead of 2 months. Clara leaned against his shoulder. The September air was cooler now. Not cold, not yet, but the brutal edge of summer had finally broken. The land was still dry, still cracked, still stubborn. But here and there she could see green. Small patches, new growth pushing up through the hard earth. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "I'm pregnant." The wagon stopped. Caleb sat frozen. The reins went slack in his hands. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. "What?" he whispered. "I've known for 2 weeks. I wasn't sure how to. I wanted to wait until the bank was settled and—" He kissed her, not on the forehead, not gently. He kissed her the way a man kisses a woman, when every wall he has ever built comes down at once. His burned hands cupped her face. His cracked ribs protested, and he didn't care. He kissed her like she was water, and he had been dying of thirst for years. And when he pulled back, his eyes were wet, and his hands were shaking, and his voice broke on the only word he could manage. "Clara." "I know," she whispered. "I know." He pressed his forehead against hers. "I prayed for rain," he said. "I prayed for rain for 2 years. And God sent me a woman from Boston who reads Emerson and fights fires and terrifies bankers. And is going to have your child." He made a sound, half laugh, half sob, and pulled her close again. Caleb built the classroom in October. He and Elias framed it in a week. The Dawsons helped with the roof. The Coopers donated lumber. Frank from the general store sent a chalkboard, real slate shipped from Austin. Clara held the first class on a Monday morning in November. 6 children, ages 5 to 13. They sat on benches that Caleb had sanded smooth, in a room with glass windows. Glass, not oilcloth, that let in the autumn light. She stood before them with a book in her healed hands and felt, for the first time since leaving Boston, like every single thing she had lost had led her exactly here. That evening, Clara sat on the porch steps, the same steps where she had read Emerson to Caleb on their 4th night together, the same steps where she had decided to stay. He came and sat beside her, close, no space between them anymore, his shoulder against hers, his hand on her knee. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "I'm listening." "To what?" "To everything." The land stretched out in front of them. The sky was going orange, then pink, then the deep bruised purple that only Texas can make. The cattle were moving slowly in the distance. The windmill turned. Somewhere in the house, a pot of stew was simmering on the stove, and the classroom still smelled like chalk dust and new wood. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "You once told me you prayed for rain." "I did." "Did you ever get it?" He looked at the sky. He looked at the land. He looked at her, this woman who had ridden 1,800 miles to marry him, who had cleaned his chicken coop
and fought his fire, and faced down his banker, and carried his child, and turned his grief into something green and growing. "No," he said, "I got something better." Clara put her head on his shoulder. His arm came around her. "I got courage," he said quietly. "Both of us did." The first rain came in December, a cold, clean rain that soaked the cracked earth and filled the dry creek bed, and turned the brown grass green overnight.
Clara stood on the porch and let it fall on her upturned face, and Caleb stood behind her, with his arms wrapped around her waist and his chin on her shoulder. And neither of them said a word, because there were no words left that the rain wasn't already saying. The ranch survived that winter, and the next, and the one after that. Clara Mercer taught school in Red Creek for 31 years. She educated 2 generations of ranch children, 3 of her own, and 1 stubborn husband who finally admitted, at the age of 58, that he actually liked Emerson. She never went back to Boston. She never wanted to. She had not come west to escape something. She had come to build something. And she had built it with burned hands and a steady heart, and the unshakable belief that home is not a place you are given. It is a place you choose. And Clara Whitfield Mercer, the mail-order bride from Boston, the woman who rode 1,800 miles to marry a stranger, chose well.